Hi, this is Josh Kulp for Daf Shevui. We are learning Masechet Avodah Zarah, and we're on Daf Lammed, page 35. And the sugyot that we're going to be learning this week and the following couple of weeks mostly have to deal with food prohibitions. I'm going to talk about one of them in particular right now, and then in the second half of this video, I'll talk about the Mishnah, which introduces more of them. The end of the Mishnah that we read a number of weeks ago had a long discussion between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Yoshua about the prohibition of eating Gentile cheese. Now, the rabbis really struggled, particularly to understand this prohibition. Originally, my feeling is that probably cheese was prohibited because it was a processed food. And we see the rabbis prohibit a lot of foods that are processed by Gentiles. And I think the underlying assumption here, as we'll talk about this more later, is that the rabbis wanted to prevent fraternization, assimilation, acculturation with non-Jews. And what people who are assimilating, acculturated, creating a social community do together is that they drink and eat processed foods, particularly together. They break bread, we still say that. They drink wine or other alcoholic beverages. They may have oils because those are components in cooking. And cheese may have been part of that. Cheese is, after all, is not a natural food. It's a processed food. But the rabbis, and there may be some hint at that in the Mishnah, but the rabbis in the Talmud really struggle to understand what's wrong with Gentile cheese. So I just wanted to go through a few of the many suggestions they make. One of them is concerning the rennet. Cheese is caused to curdle. Milk is caused to curdle with a rennet. It is an enzyme from the stomach. The rabbis did not consider this to be a mixture of milk and meat. And the problem then with the rennet is, what if it came from a non-kosher animal, an animal that was slaughtered improperly? And the problem with that is the rabbis have a discussion about whether the rennet is considered to be part of the animal. And it sounds like elsewhere they decide that rennet is not considered part of the animal, such that if you have an unkosher animal, or let's say not an unkosher animal, but an animal that wasn't slaughtered properly, that rennet is not considered part of its flesh, and you could use that rennet. So then what's the problem with non-kosher, with non-Jewish cheese, with Gentile cheese? Another suggestion is that the non-Jews use lambs or calves dedicated for Avodah Zarah, for idolatry. The problem with this is not only the problem, do they really do that? Are all non-Jewishly owned calves dedicated for idolatry? Is that really true? But even if it was true, the problem is that items used in idolatry are prohibited not just from eating, but also from deriving benefit. And Jews are allowed to derive benefit from non-Jewish cheese and just not eat it. So that's a problem. Another suggestion they come up with is snake poison. Rabbis sure do love to talk about their snake poison. We've seen that a lot of times. Really? The Gemara asks, really? Snake poison's put in cheese? Is there any evidence for this? It doesn't seem to match reality. That suggestion doesn't do too well. Another suggestion is that it's smeared with pig fat. I think that Jews are sort of always worried that non-Jews are secretly smearing pig fat all over everything. Someone once told me that they do that to refrigerator doors and the glass in the refrigerator, and therefore you have to kosher your refrigerator. Don't worry, I do not kosher my refrigerator. Another one is that they smear them, that they use vinegar. And vinegar is related to wine, so it's related to the wine prohibition. And finally, there's the fear that they're using some form of orla, which is trees grown before the fruit of trees before the fourth year, the first 3 years of the fruit of a tree. So those are just some of the suggestions. You can see rabbis sort of know that Gentile cheese is prohibited, but they don't know why, and they're trying to figure it out. So the last part of this daf is a Mishnah, and I just wanted to go briefly through two ideas about the Mishnah. That the Mishnah lists food products that Jews can't eat but can derive benefit from, and the list seems to have two parts. The first part are not really, they're sort of intermingled inside the Mishnah, but some of these foods are prohibited for fear of them containing literally non-kosher ingredients, such as milk or fish brine. How do we know that the milk is from a kosher animal? How do we know that the brine was made from kosher fish? The second one goes back to what I said before about being processed foods, bread, wine, oil, and certain types of cooked foods. Again, the idea here seems to be that by eating processed foods, you're assimilating. It's a sign of assimilation, whereas raw, uncooked food is not a sign of assimilation. There is a wonderful book by David Friedenreich called, what's it called? Hold on a second. It's called Foreigners and Their Foods. It's on my shelf in the back there. I would highly suggest reading it. It talks about food prohibitions in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We are not the only religion that forbids people from eating other people's foods, and it's an excellent read, actually quite readable too. So that's David Friedenreich, Foreigners and Their Foods.